Well, then, we are live with episode 40, the big 40 of Space Rocks Uplink. Just going to bring Mark McCorcoran in. Mark, how are you doing? And wow, that is a background that might need some explanation in just a few minutes' time. We'll see how we go there. How are you doing tonight? Congratulations on 40 episodes of Uplink. That certainly feels like a milestone.
It does indeed, yes. Good to see you, Alex. Just adjusting my microphone here. I was using it for other things earlier today. There I am. That's good. Yes, no. It's a cold day in March, but a day to celebrate, as you say. 40 episodes. That's quite remarkable. And we started what was it mid-April last year? So it's almost been one a week, but not quite. We've talked about this. In the early days we were doing two a week. I mean, how mad were we at that point? We were mad and bored, but
We were mad and determined. And for anyone that's joining us for the first time tonight, I mean, just like what's Space Rocks all about? What are we trying to do here with this? Because I kind of feel like sometimes we might be meeting people for the first time online who are watching us for the first time.
Well, in some ways, it goes a little bit back to our guest this evening because it goes back to some events that happened in the last 7 or 8 years now with the major launches that ESA had and major missions. So the Gaia, Milky Way Surveyor, the Rosetta Comet mission, ExoMars, and those are things which are all in the very much in the public eye, as we'll talk to our guest this evening about. But they're also in the cultural eye. They also attracted general public attention who came to it through different things, through music. We worked with various artists on bits of music which were used in the context of those events. Poetry, writing, science fiction. I think, Space Rocks is a way, in a sense, of combining those things, bringing all of that inspiration and excitement and engagement about space and science together from those different cultural aspects, going out and doing that live on stage. But of course, for the time being, we're not able to do that. So that's why we're doing it this way.
Indeed. Well, I suppose, as you say, our two guests tonight, in many ways, are an encapsulation of much of what Space Rocks is all about. It's not about the science; it's about how we get the science out there. I suppose as two people working for one of the biggest and most esteemed, respected news organizations in the world, they know something about how you reduce stories down to, I don't want to say their bare essence, but how you take the incredibly complex, much like what you do, and make it, I guess, comprehensible to people who maybe aren't specialists in the field, which I think is a pretty unique gift. And you have a personal connection with both Rebecca and Jonathan, don't you?
Yeah, I do. So, the guests this evening are Becky Morelle and Jonathan Amos, who are both science correspondents at the BBC. Becky does a lot of TV work and radio, and Jonathan is more the online, the science writer stuff. But they cut and paste and they do stuff together a lot. And I've known Jonathan. Well, I'll explain the story in a few minutes. It actually goes to this picture behind me here. I've known Jonathan for many years, and then Becky I met, I suppose, during Rosetta for the first time. So 2014, nearly 7 years ago now. I've seen, in a sense, how they've changed what they do as well, because the world of science has changed considerably in the last 7 years. A lot more public engagement and outreach, but also lots of engagement with policy. Becky, we talked to her just beforehand, the technical check. She's been working on the coronavirus, obviously, for the last year as a science journalist, and how science is influenced by policy and governments engage with expert knowledge and then convert that into how we actually live our lives. So in some ways, the role of a science journalist is much more than just entertainment or engagement or education. It can be involved in setting policy. So it's a very interesting and complex domain to tread, particularly, as you said, for a big corporation like the BBC.
Indeed. Well, it's going to be a fascinating topic tonight. I look forward to bringing them in. I think I'll bring Jonathan in first because I have a feeling he's going to be walking into a trap to do with your background. So,
there you go.
Very good.
I couldn't resist it,
Yeah, you couldn't, and I couldn't, and we did not coordinate this.
That's unbelievable. All right. Okay, so it's a duel of backgrounds. Jonathan and Rebecca, an absolute pleasure to have you here. I assume you are both receiving.
Yeah, so we should explain these backgrounds.
Because Rebecca and Alex, I said, are completely innocent. You won't have a clue, right?
No idea.
When McCaughrean says he's known me for many years, he has been the bane of my life for many years. Because he used to, when he was at Exeter University, he used to send me emails that sort of basically said, I think you'll find, and Becky will back me up here, that the most irritating emails you can possibly receive from some know-it-all from some university that says, I think you'll find that's not quite right. And so he has, to me anyway, become known as Super Sub. And because we're kind of the same generation, this rather poor footballer that you see behind him, who was so poor, he spent most of the time on the substitutes bench. They never played him from the start. Whereas the guy behind me here, one of the greatest footballers ever to grace the English game, scoring perhaps the greatest goal ever against some team from the Northwest who I can't quite remember. It begins with an L, the Liverpool, something like that.
Yeah, maybe.
Anyway, yeah. So we have a bit of banter, a bit of to and fro, and but I'm grateful. I'm grateful for all the pain that he's caused me down the years.
Your articles were greatly improved, I'm sure, by all of that. But yeah, so just to fill in the guests who are a bit younger, this is David Fairclough, the super sub for Liverpool in the 1970s. And of course, super sub as in editing his work after it's been published. And that, I don't know who that long-haired lout is from Arsenal.
Charlie George.
That's where he spent most of his career on the floor like that, I think. But all right, very good. So, Alex, I'm going to try and change my background. You have the first question. So.
Well, there you go. I mean, I suppose, in many ways, this just sort of, affirms, I think, something that I think, might just run through a lot of the conversation tonight, because it seems that, obviously, the business of reporting, means many emotional and shared moments, a few of which I think you've all shared together just with different missions and so on. So, Rebecca, I wonder if I could start with you with perhaps one of the most basic questions. What is unique or different about reporting on science? What qualities does that kind of reporting have as opposed to other kinds of reporting?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's the best. That's my first answer. It's the coolest. I think the thing about science that kind of stands out for me and kind of makes it stand out in the news bulletins, and it kind of has that sort of that wonder in that kind of sort of joy, that kind of discovery that you might get that with a sort of business or politics story sometimes, but it's genuinely that kind of that push of sort of human ingenuity, the things we're pushing at, we're learning. I'm not saying kind of every story is kind of, that's great, that's wonderful, that's a lovely discovery. There are obviously sort of loads of, complex issues within, but I think that's what kind of drew me to it. It's kind of, it has that sort of factor, it's just exciting, and it's kind of joyful a lot of the time.
So Becky, you have a science background. You have a undergraduate degree in science. But what was your path from there? Was it obvious at that point that's what you wanted to do, or did it become obvious? When did that happen? I mean, I know Jonathan's story is different, and we'll come to that. But
yeah, well, I studied chemistry at university, and I did a master's. My last year was actually spending a year working in a lab before I wrote it all up. And kind of at that point, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but the year of working in a lab definitely confirmed that I wasn't really cut out to be a scientist. It was a year of doing a lot of pipetting, putting things. It was a project on Alzheimer's disease. It was really interesting. It was kind of the bigger subject area was great, but it was a lot of pipetting, putting it in a machine, nothing worked. A lot of pipetting, putting it in a machine, nothing worked. And it was a year of that. And I kind of thought, this isn't for me, but I loved the project. It was about Alzheimer's disease. It was about finding a protein involved. That was fascinating. So I thought, I do love science and I want to stay in it. So I thought about going into science communication. And then I worked at the Royal Institution for a little bit, which does the Christmas lectures. It's a big kind of, historical science organisation. And then I got a bursary to join the BBC. And in fact, Mr. Amos is the man who gave me my job. So obviously makes brilliant decisions, makes excellent choices. So, and the reason why I sort of wanted to be a journalist is it's kind of, I think for me, it's like I want to do all the exciting bits. I want someone else to do the hard slog for sort of 20, 30 years. And then I'm the one who kind of gets to wrap it all together at the end. It's that sort of magpie-ish thing. And I didn't want to be sort of tied down to one particular area. I wanted to cover everything from, Pluto to the deep ocean to, this year I've been doing COVID. So it's that which kind of drew me towards it. But I kind of knew I wanted to stay in science. I mean, I've always, from school, I always loved it. But yeah, I think that I thought maybe I would be a scientist, but I think sometimes, when working out what you want to do, working out what you don't want to do is really important. The lab work it killed me. It just wasn't for me.
Well, now you've covered so many other scientific fields. Have you seen any way you think, oh, I wish I'd actually done that? I mean, roaming around volcanoes, and we'll come to that later on. There's other sorts of things other than pipetting in a lab, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's loads of it, but I think the main thing for me, I think I sort of like too much of it. So to sort of hone down into one area, to focus on, just even like one bit in space, like Pluto or whatever, that then you'd miss out on all the other stuff too. I think I like the breadth of it, but you might not get the depth of it. That's a problem. Sometimes it's frustrating because you're constantly kind of skimming the surface. You're constantly sort of dipping in and then dipping out again. But the cool thing about the job is you get to kind of I feel like I've sort of witnessed all of these kind of quite amazing fleeting moments, but you get to be a little part of that at each point. So it's greediness, basically. Greediness and hanging on the coattails of other people.
Well, so speaking of other people, so let's just do the symmetry. So John, you came into this a different way, and I think this is an important story to tell because, of course, many kids who are interested in science may think, well, it's maybe not for me because I'm maybe not great at this particular thing or that thing, or I don't have the opportunity at the right moment. I've got to my A-levels and it hasn't worked out. And your great demonstration that, in fact, there's always, if you have the desire, I mean, it won't happen for everybody, but, tell us your story because I think that's important for people.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is that I wasn't the sharpest tool in the box. That's
that's what you keep telling me. I'm trying to show this evening that that's not true.
No, I didn't get the grades to get into university. And I decided I wanted to become a journalist. That's what I pursued. I got my training. I wanted to become a political reporter. Goodness knows why, because within a few months of actually starting reporting, I realized that politics was not for me. My great hero at the time was a chap called John Cole, who was the BBC's political editor. And he used to stand in front of Downing Street in his Irish accent, telling us what was going on inside. And I thought that was for me. But I tipped up in Cambridge in 1986 as a cub reporter with the BBC, because I'm a one company man. And I thought I was going to graduate to that, a bit of town hall politics and then go to London, go to Westminster. That was kind of my dream. But I realized pretty rapidly that didn't interest me. And being in Cambridge, of course, you can't avoid the science. It's everywhere. It just drips out of the university, the science park there, and all of the companies around. And it was literally, a road to Damascus event. I went into work one afternoon, and because I was the late reporter, and the producer said to me, "You've got to go and interview this guy called Greg Winter. He's done something very clever up at the Laboratory of Molecular Biology." I said, "Well, what's he done then?" He said, "It's something to do with monoclonal antibodies." He's humanized them. Apparently this is a big thing. So off I went, not knowing anything about this. And I spent 2 hours with Greg Winter. And he absolutely blew my mind. I mean, I sat there thinking, my God, you can do this? An extraordinary man who who that afternoon, when he was explaining to me the science that he did, I came back and thought, wow, this is incredible. And in subsequent years, I thought, well, he's bound to get a Nobel Prize for that. He didn't. He got a Nobel Prize for something else, which was even more extraordinary. But essentially, I changed direction at that moment. I enrolled with the Open University, and I did my science in my 20s and 30s as as I was working with the BBC, and eventually angled my way into science reporting. And just to go back to what Becky said, it's the wow factor for me. Right back to that afternoon with Greg Winter, it was, wow, we can do that. That's extraordinary. And every day I get out of bed and I speak to people who do amazing things, and I want to be part of that. I don't profess to have the education to fully understand everything that they do, but I can understand enough to realize that what they are doing is incredible. I mean, Becky will tell you, the development of vaccines over the past year is nothing short of extraordinary. What has happened. We have seen something really quite amazing in this past year in terms of the development of vaccines, and it's great to be able to report on that stuff. It really, really is.
Well, that's a really interesting thing, of course, because I suppose in the last year, I think what's been accentuated is the need, of course, for science reporting and clear communications and so on, because I suppose there are so many avenues for interpretation and reinterpretation on social media, for instance. And so really hammering the messages across, I suppose, has been what's so key to so much of, this experience of this dastardly, but as you say, also, incredibly inspiring year for science. So how has reporting changed over the last few years in this era of social media, where obviously, people are not reading or interpreting stories once a day. They're not just waiting for the evening news, perhaps. They're engaging with news and other people's ideas about the news, possibly hundreds of times a day. I mean, has that marked a fundamental shift, Becky, do you think, in terms of how you tell stories, in terms of maybe bite-sized reporting?
Yeah, I mean, go on, Becky.
No. Yeah, I mean, it has changed things a lot. I mean, I primarily report for TV news, so which is quite a sort of traditional medium, really. I do stuff for the kind of evening bulletins or BBC Breakfast in the morning, but increasingly, people aren't kind of sitting down to kind of watch news at one time. They're consuming it in a really different way. So I think the way we put out our stories, I mean, although actually, because working for the website, that's where I joined the BBC in 2005, and that's kind of where John came from. We've been sort of more at that kind of forefront of kind of just getting the stories out there and kind of going with it rather than kind of waiting for the traditional bulletins. But I mean, if social media is interesting because you're in a way you're connecting with sort of a different group of people, but then you have to remember not everyone's on social media. I think you can become obsessed with sort of interacting with people on Twitter, but then you're talking to kind of quite a limited number of people too. So part of the challenge is to sort of to do the social media stuff too, but not to kind of forfeit the more traditional side of things and think the only conversations are going on Twitter. But I mean the last year, because I've been doing COVID over the last year, it's been really interesting for talking. I think kind of scientist communication on Twitter has been amazing, actually. I mean, some of the threads kind of describing these preprints of papers on sort of new variants coming out, and the vaccines, and there's a whole audience of people sort of like gagging for that kind of immediate information. I do wonder kind of post pandemic if it might kind of speed up science a bit more in other ways and kind of bring sort of science a bit more directly in touch with people as well. I'm quite curious to see what the change is there, because everyone's got used to things happening so quickly and immediately getting information and kind of running with that information. And I think it can't sustain this pace, but I do feel like things have changed quite a lot.
I must say I've enjoyed the last year in terms of the preponderance of expertise being on our airwaves. I think that's been tremendously refreshing. There was kind of a drift away from kind of celebrating expertise, and I think in the past year we've seen that reestablished, and a lot of people working within their various fields across the whole COVID story, getting them on to react quickly, because scientists don't like that very often. They don't like the instant reaction, and they've kind of had to step up and interpret in the live, so to speak. And I think that's been great, and if we can carry that forward into the future, I think if a lot of the media industry takes anything out of this, it is value expertise, because the fundamentals of journalism haven't changed. I mean, right from when I started, it's still exactly the same. It's still about the story. It's still about the critical eye. It's still about getting the story across, the narrative across in a way that will engage with people. So we swim a different stroke maybe today. We swim faster. But the absolute fundamentals of journalism for me haven't really changed from the day when I was using a typewriter and carbon paper.
It's kind of repackaging it, isn't it? It's almost sort of just repackaging what we're doing.
Many more platforms, obviously. You have to have a different voice. When you're on Instagram or Twitter or on the TV news or on a radio station. You use a different voice, you use different language, but the story hasn't changed. The story's the same.
So let me come to this issue of process in a moment, but I wanted to pick up on one thing, which is, of course, interesting as a sociodynamic thing, is that certain fields of science and certain audiences, certainly in the social media domain, already have a kind of a built-in a kind of a charm about them. People are very keen on space. They have been for a long time. Whereas I suspect, people aren't keen on vaccines as such. It's because they want to know and they want to be informed. So is that something which you're conscious of, that you're kind of, to some communities, it's trying to push material because they need to know, and others, well, just give them anything and they'll be happy with it. I don't want to go too far with that, but when I think about physics, for example, we often, get not criticised, but we get envy from some of our colleagues that the stuff we do in space doesn't necessarily translate to the same kind of engagement on particle physics or on molecular biology or chemistry in the lab, all of which are doing amazing things. I remember a few years ago I got asked to go to give a talk about science communication to the nuclear power industry. And I thought, bloody hell, there's a tough job, right? Telling a positive message about nuclear fission, has to be done because we need to explain how it works, and it doesn't. But it was kind of like pushing uphill, whereas for us, it's all just sort of downhill into the gravity well, isn't it, really? Are you conscious of that in the different audiences that you interact with?
Yeah, we know what works. We get data. When I started, we had no data, or we had a report a month later because, there was some polling outfit that would tell you how many people had tuned into a particular radio station or TV station because they had a group of people out there who would keep diaries. Now we know how far they scroll down the page. We know where they've come from. We know where they go to. So there is an enormous amount of data. And, if you come into the newsroom at the BBC, they have all of this data in front of them, and they are making editorial decisions about changing that headline because they don't think it's engaging, or pushing that story down because it just doesn't seem to work, and pulling something up because for whatever reason it's grabbing the eyeballs. So there's that which plays into the equation now, right, for sure.
But isn't that dangerous? Isn't it that you're chasing the tail of what the public want?
Yes, it's got to be a bit of sense and in all of that. We could be just completely clickbaity. But look behind me. This is Mars. This is a geology mission. This is a chemistry mission. Yeah, they're doing really clever chemistry on the surface of another planet. So,
yeah, but,
I mean,
I'm going to provoke you now, right,
Yeah.
on that, because you've gone there, right? I mean, remember Curiosity in 2012? There was a massive buzz of excitement
Yeah.
about the sky crane and about the landing, and it was, and then probably a year later, nobody apart from a strand of scientists who were chemists and geologists were interested.
Yeah.
It went away. So the question is, how do you translate that in your messaging? That it's not all about the tech; it's about what it's going to do.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the thing we struggle with. I mean, and
There's some of both, though, isn't there? I mean, I think like every story. I mean, like we both work with the brilliant producer Ali Francis, and kind of she comes from a straight news background. So she worked for the 6 and 10 o'clock news, and literally every story we do with her, you kind of get kind of nerdily excited about this bit of kit, or it's going to find out this kind of weird and wonderful thing. And everyone, it comes back down to, why should I care? Why does it matter? And I think if you're telling a story and you're not, in whatever field it is, whether, it's like a math story or a vaccine story or a Mars story, if you're not getting that bit across, then you probably shouldn't be doing the story, because if you can't answer, if the answer is, well, you shouldn't really care, well, then don't do that one, do something else. So I think that's, you've got, as John said, the sort of the data and the stats, and that's kind of helps to make decisions, but those fundamentals about kind of what you decide to tell about the story should be there. And I think, I think with the Perseverance mission, a lot of it's was the excitement of getting the thing down and the phenomenal pictures. But also for us, I mean, in the TV pieces, we had really great interviews about sort of what the mission was going to do, fantastic scientists kind of talking about, sort of where life sort of, the slime mats, where life might have kind of, appeared in lakes on Earth billions of years ago, and sort of describing the same thing. And, she really brought that alive. When someone's kind of grinning and talking about slime, it's kind of, that's why people at home should kind of care about this, kind of think, well, this is really, this is really interesting. So I think, sometimes I think actually sometimes as being a specialist is a bad thing, because you can get a bit too kind of, if you know too much about one subject, for example, I don't do many chemistry stories, and actually I can't remember much of my chemistry degree, but in some ways it's better to know less, because you kind of then ask the right questions about it. So you do need to step back and kind of think, well, what's the sort of bigger picture? The
shiny thing, though, is I mean, if I have a criticism of some of my colleagues who cover space, for example, there's an obsession with the shiny grey stuff. The rockets. It's almost as if it doesn't matter what's on the top of them. Whereas for me personally, I'm actually more interested in what it is the rockets are putting in space and what they are doing. And that's why anybody who follows what I do, you will see me write an awful lot about Earth observation, because I'm interested in what the satellites are taking pictures of planet Earth and what they're seeing and what it means and what the implications are of that. For a lot of, I guess, the space journalism community, their interest ends when the satellite comes off the top of the rocket, and then they're on to the next rocket launch. And, I don't wish to be harsh on them, because I love all of the, the flame and all of that kind of stuff. It's terrific, but, it's amazing to see what we're able to do now. The science that we're able to deliver, it's extraordinary. I think,
as a kind of an encapsulation of that, it's going to be fascinating to see how different parts of the media cover the launch of James Webb later this year, JWST. Yeah. I mean, keep in mind, and without putting the numbers on it, people say, is that, those rockets are expensive. Why aren't you using this rocket and so on? Using the Ariane 5 to launch JWST. It's 1.5% of the mission cost, right? It doesn't matter what rocket you use in this case. Use the most reliable one.
I hope it does.
Use the most reliable one, right? I mean, and so there is a point there. But then telling the story, because JWST as an observatory will not yield that moment of landing, or that moment. There'll be a moment of first images, but they won't be the best ones you'll ever see, because that will take time to build up. So building a story which is not a planetary story, which have their punctuated moments, right, of great excitement, telling a story about, because it's really going to be about the science, not the process, right? It's going to be what you find, and that won't be day one, not at all.
as opposed to the 7 minutes of terror, though, that we've had with Perseverance, there's going to be 2 weeks of terror, right?
Oh,
I mean,
a month.
There's good
a month.
jeopardy. There is good jeopardy.
A month
isn't there?
of terror,
Yeah.
a month of absolute mayhem in control rooms in America and in Europe and Canada as this thing tries to unfurl itself from launch. So it's. I mean, I called it at the beginning of the year. I said this was or would be the launch of the year. James Webb will be the launch of the year. No question about that. $10 billion on the top of a rocket. Wow.
But that's a human story as well, isn't it? You know, so it's, you've got the kind of the science that it's going to do, which will be spectacular if it all goes right. But I mean, that kind of, I think a lot of people wouldn't understand that kind of jeopardy, you know, so like working on a mission for so long, investing that much money, having this really kind of complex piece of kit that has to do all these complicated things to start working, you know, that's kind of bonkers for a lot of people. There aren't many sort of areas where you get sort of so much resting on kind of, you know, just this kind of key moment. And that's, I mean, that's part of the story, you know, that's the sort of why does it matter? You've got the what it's going to do, which is fabulous. But I do think for the beginning bit, that kind of getting it up there safely.
Well, that was, you know, of course, that was a big story for Rosetta, that 10-year journey. Well, look, if I was to put a picture of me up when I got involved in JWST 23 years ago, and other people have been involved for another 5 years, right? I mean, it's almost 3 decades that mission's been in. In fact, the very first let's build one of these was conference was 1989. You know, it's remarkable. Right?
That's amazing. I mean, that's what makes space so amazing. These things are so long time. I mean, this is obviously like why I wasn't kind of cut out for lab work. I couldn't hack like a few months of pipetting, you know, let alone kind of 30 years of sort of waiting for something to happen. But I mean, I think that is one of the things that captured the imagination with the Rosetta mission, just sort of, you know, the weight, the kind of the effort and the weight, and then it all comes down to this kind of little moment kind of at the end that has to, well, I mean, it doesn't have to, but it's much better if it goes right, you know. It's just it's quite an alien concept to a lot of people, and kind of, you know, it's I think people kind of sit up and listen and think, you know, God, 10 years to get somewhere, 10 years to kind of land this little thing on a comet, you know, that they haven't seen before. You know, it's balmy. You know, when you really think about it, it's kind of a bonkers thing, which is great.
It goes back. I mean, we had this conversation, didn't we, the other day, where you chastised me again for my comment about Perseverance. You know, you travel for 500 billion kilometers, and you put down within a few hundred meters of where you decided you were going to 7 months previously. Now, when I get out of bed in the morning, I think that's amazing, and I don't want people to not think it is amazing. And you know, all of the boring engineers and professors at the European Space Agency email me or tweet me and say, it's maths.
Well, the point was, all right, let's do it, right? The point was, and we do that. We're guilty of this, right? We're guilty of using these metaphors that, you know, we're rendezvousing with a comet moving at up 25,000 kilometers an hour or something. And ooh, big numberology. Ooh, it isn't, right? We're rendezvousing at 1 meter a second. We've done all the work to get there. And the problem is, the way that story is often told, you fly across that great distance and land within 100 meters, is not a golf shot, right? If you hit in the hole in one at that distance with no control after the first bit, yeah, it'd be amazing and it would be impossible. But that's not what we do. We do all the other stuff to make sure. It's all those tiny maneuvers. And how do you even measure where the spacecraft is to millimeters per second when it's in the middle of space? I mean, so I suppose that's where we were giving you a hard time, right?
Yeah, that is amazing.
No, it is.
That we can do
No. But that's the way. The problem was that the way it was phrased, and I'm sorry. Forgive me. But it was, you know, you launch it and you fire it and it lands in the right place. No, it was all the stuff that happened in between that made it land.
Yeah, but you can't put that into however many characters on Twitter, can you? All the stuff in between.
Oh, I don't know. You've seen one of my Twitter threads. You could
they're quite
just
long.
go on for
They're quite long.
Go on for a week. It's fine.
I would love to explore more about, you know, JWST and so on, but I mean, just focusing on Rosetta for a moment. You know, we're talking about like the incredible science behind it, and of course, it is an achievement that I still think about and cannot fully comprehend, because there is almost no earthly metaphor that successfully represents, I think, exactly what happens, that achievement. And yet, I think one of the best things I ever learned about storytelling when you want to tell a person's story is ask them their hopes and fears. Do you think that the success of Rosetta in kind of, making the headlines, really making it out there, was because it wasn't just the science or just the engineering feat, but also the core human drama that was at play, the suspense? Could we actually do it? Was that an important component of the success of that story, making it out there? Because it really went everywhere, which, I mean, as I guess a lifelong enthusiast, follower, reader, consumer of so much of these stories, it is frustrating at times to see things that do seem remarkable barely make the headlines, despite their kind of innate fascinations. Do you think that the reason why Rosetta was such a huge story was in part not just because of science or engineering, but also because people really, they felt something when they were reading that story?
They engaged with the humans in that story, and we anthropomorphized the vehicles as well, the plucky robot, and all the rest of it. But I mean, another example is what's sitting behind Becky now, Pluto. I mean, there was something very, very similar. You travel right out to the edge of the sun's planets. We'll call Pluto a planet for now. We won't get into that debate.
Press the red button, Alex. Now press that. He's off, gone.
The astronomers. Oh dear, honestly, But anyway, this thing goes out there, and they have got one shot. They've got to point the camera in the right direction. If they don't, they'll miss the whole thing. And you had this group of characters gathered, at Johns Hopkins, just north of Washington, and there was a woman in charge. They called her mom. She was in the control room, and it was an extraordinary moment to see those pictures come in. We hadn't seen Pluto in that detail ever before, and likewise with Rosetta, we had this white blob on the pictures, and gradually this duck came into view, and just the most beautiful thing with this halo, I mean, it looked magical in the pictures, and then we somehow managed to, after a few efforts, 3 bumps or whatever it was, to actually put down in a cave as well. Look, amazing. Look, you traveled for 10, 20 years, whatever it is, and you managed to put it in a cave. How clever is that? Come on, McCaughrean.
Don't even ask.
But that's, I mean, I think that, it is that kind of human drama, but it doesn't hurt to have a bit of beauty attached to it as well, with like the big reveal. I think it's kind of, for me, it's that combination of, but with both of those stories, actually, it is the human drama. It's kind of the, this sort of daring do of this team trying to do this kind of crazily hard thing, but also this kind of, coupled with that, we sort of know nothing about this, and now we can suddenly know loads about it, or we've never seen this before. I mean, the sort of the comparison, the before and after of the Pluto pictures, this kind of blurry Hubble picture, and then suddenly, I'm going to sort of lean over a bit, you kind of get this coming through.
I mean, it
was amazing. It was amazing. Same with Rosetta. It was just sort of, this place we didn't really have any idea about. I mean, we obviously had a bit, when I say we, I'm including myself, but you obviously had a bit of an idea of what the place was going to be like, but it was just sort of, I think those two things combined. And some stories, I mean, I think part of the reason Rosetta really sort of went mad in a way is we were really excited about it, and I think our enthusiasm kind of sold into the sort of newsroom a little bit, because we started, when Rosetta first woke up after its deep sleep, we sort of went at it fairly early in news terms and kept at it. And I think in a way, because we were genuinely sort of, when John first told me about it, I was like, wow, this is nuts. This is kind of a mad story. And I think sometimes that kind of gets the news editors on board, and you can kind of, the story builds up, but I think both of those stories obviously had a bit of sort of gold dust on them.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, I'm sure we've talked about it, but it was actually an active decision on our part to do the wake up of Rosetta live. The engineers wanted none of that, right? They wanted it to wake up in that room behind me and then tell you all the next day whether it had woken up or not. And that took quite some persuading to say, look, you do it live, because if you do it live and it works, you've got the audience hooked. And if you fail, at least you've been transparent. You haven't hidden anything. It's happened right in plain view. But I remember that evening, because of course there was the delay. It didn't come right on the moment, so there was this sort of suspense that happened. And I think if it had been much longer, probably the audience would have gone away. It was just about the right length for people to stay. Will it? Will it? Will it? Will it? Hooray! So I went on Newsnight that night and with Paxman, and it was a pre-record, so it was all very nice. It was very charming. You listened to the story, and then when it went out on Newsnight, he had Chris Lintott on. So he played the segment with me talking to him, and then he turned to Chris Lintott and he said, "Well, that all seemed a bit fake, didn't it? I'm sure they made it up to build the suspense." And I watched it and I thought, you never asked me that question. And I thought, but there's that sort of weird cynicism a little bit. But I think you helped overcome that in the BBC, because what was the story? One of you told me about the Philae landing and the fact that everybody stood up in the newsroom and cheered, and that was the first time that had happened since Jeffrey Archer was sent to jail or something. Is that right?
I think it really captured.
Yeah.
I mean, but I just think the whole, I don't know, the BBC is like a small representation of it, isn't it? It just captured everyone, really. I think people kind of got on board with it. It was a magical mission. I think. Well, I'm allowed to say magical as a science correspondent, but
magical realism.
Yeah.
Let me ask the provocative question before handing back to Alex. Obviously, there's cultural differences in the way that science is represented. You've talked about NASA missions. NASA is the space agency of one country. We're the space agency of 22. And then you have China as a big player now in civil space. There's private space as well. But let's talk firstly about what the cultural differences and the differences in representation that there are, and how you've perceived that, and how that doesn't affect your storytelling as such, but your information gathering presumably at some level is influenced by that. So John, you start. Give us some insight into.
I mean, the Americans are very good at theatre. Excellent. I mean, they really are. They know how to put on a show. They put on a show. The Chinese, on the other hand, won't let anybody into the theatre until they know the play has happened and it went okay. I mean, I'm serious about that. China has done some extraordinary things in the last few weeks. They've put a spacecraft down on the surface of the moon, picked up the samples, brought them home, and all the rest of it. Now they've got a probe in orbit around Mars. Fantastic. Did they cover it live on national TV? I was watching the various live, because you can see them on the web, the various sort of live news channels in China. Nothing. You could, on the day that Tianwen-1 went into orbit around Mars, you could read about the United Arab Emirates Hope probe on their website and the fact that it had gone into orbit. But was there any live coverage of what China was doing at that moment? No. And until it was in orbit, we knew nothing. That's not quite true, because the amateur radio enthusiasts were listening across the radio signals coming back, and they could tell from the way the signal fell off when it went around the back of Mars and reappeared and picked it up again, that it must have done the orbit insertion properly. Only then, if you watched Chinese TV, would you have seen the announcement that something was going on. And in the middle, you've got Europe, who almost apologizes sometimes for doing great things. It just drives me nuts, I have to say, because, like China, they need to shout about this stuff as well. We do some amazing things in Europe. We really, really do. And yet sometimes we just kind of, out the side of our mouths say, we've done this. It was quite good, wasn't it?
But I think there is a cultural difference. At some level, we respond, our audiences, I think European audiences sometimes recoil for that overly boosterly, flag-waving nationalism which comes out in some of these programs. And it's difficult because we have 22 member states. How do we actually even pick the right tenor, because some countries might want to do it more than others. But I know that you've both told me that, yes, boost it, and we've listened to you. I think we've tried to change things in the past, at least. But also there's a kind of a more homely approach. I don't know how to phrase that. There's a little bit, maybe because we're not so organized sometimes, I hate to say that. I mean, maybe there's a little bit more access, or a little bit, it's not all a front. Do you know what I mean? Becky, you've covered these events, and I don't mean to make a difference. I just wonder also what lessons we can learn. But in a culturally specific way, there's no point turning up in a rah-rah sense. It just doesn't. I don't think it sells in Europe, actually.
I don't know. I mean, I think so when we've been out to the States to do the missions, I mean, I think Pluto was interesting because the thing that really, I mean, it wasn't, I love genuine enthusiasm, and when something goes right, like that, you can tell when people are sort of faking it, ooh, that's great, but you can tell when people really mean it. And I think the sort of the NASA things you see, people, they are feeling it. They're not pretending. They're just kind of letting themselves go, like the inhibitions go. I think that the nationalism is quite interesting. I mean, with the New Horizons mission, what was kind of interesting for me were the sort of USA flags were sort of, the stars and stripes were handed out, and there was big chants of sort of USA, which was kind of sort of, I suppose, being from the UK, you kind of think, oh, gosh, that's that's quite. I mean, I had a little wave. It was quite exciting being part of the crowd. And you obviously wouldn't kind of get that, with an ESA mission, because you'd have like too many people chanting too many countries or whatever. It wouldn't happen. But I think sometimes I feel like I wish some of the sort of the reservedness, if that's a word, I like to see sort of the genuine excitement, and think sometimes the speeches, there are too many people in suits, kind of get to the scientists who've sort of really done their stuff. I don't want to hear from the funders. I know they're really important, but I don't care. Get me the people who've like spent 30 years working on this. I want them first. That's kind of the difference. And I think in America they that's what they do. They kind of know who to put up sort of first of all. I mean, access is, when you go over there, access is fantastic as well. It's quite ramshackle too in lots of ways. It looks really glossy, but it's still kind of a big sort of cabal of chaos, but in a it's that's kind of the difference for me. It's sort of, but they know who to sort of put up and when, I think.
They craft it to tell the story, whereas in Europe too often you see this, right, well, who is the Director General? That person must be on it. Which was the space agency, National Space Agency, that contributed most to this? Oh, well, we must have their CEO on the panel as well. And before you know it, you've got 5 people that all look like me. And we're not very engaging, I'm afraid to say. Rather than pulling the people in that can wow, there's too much of this institutionalism still that exists in Europe, rather than selling what they should be selling. I mean, and of course, then they fall over themselves. There's a classic example back in December, where Europe and America have launched this amazing satellite, Sentinel-6, which is measuring the height of the oceans. Okay, fantastic technology on board. Really is going to measure the rise in ocean height to less than 1 millimeter per year. Just tremendous stuff. And when they switched it on after it had been launched, and the instrument looked down at the surface of the Earth, the engineers they were amazed at what they could see. So normally when you look at it's got an altimeter, okay? So microwave comes down, bounces up, you count the time, and you get a surface kind of elevation from that, okay? But you can also process that information into something approaching a standard image, okay? And they did that. And they could see, it was over northeast Russia, you could see this lagoon, you could see the waves, you could see ponds, you could see rivers. And immediately you thought, wow, we've never been able to do this. So they held a press conference, and all the great and the good were there, as we've become used to. And they forgot in the press conference to present this image. They forgot, okay? And helpfully, an old retired ESA engineer rang in and said, have you got anything you can show that demonstrates the amazing electronics now in this instrument? Q, show the image. And then there was some sort of rustling that they couldn't find it in the files. And so it never got shown. at that press conference. And so, yeah, there's this kind of, chill, guys, come on, chill a little bit. Think about the story that you're trying to tell and choose the most appropriate people to get that across. And I can guarantee you that most of the time, it's not the big suit to tell that story. Well, it really isn't.
Before I hand back to Alex, I mean, I have to be a little bit careful. I fully support what you're saying, but you would not believe sometimes what a struggle it has been to try to do it that way. I mean, again, I think this is somewhat different from the rah-rah enthusiasm. I think you've seen our people can be incredibly enthusiastic, right? So it's there, but that front end thing, the institutional thing, well, okay, I've tried a lot over the years, and, I think there have been changes. I mean, one of the things we did very early on, I think it was Rosetta, was there was a press conference, I think, before the wake up, and it was supposed to be, here's going to be 6 or 7 people all telling us, and it was all they were going to be sitting on chairs behind a desk. And I said, get rid of the desk. Let them stand on stage and talk to each other. NASA still does that, which is weird, but because I just don't think that works. Just put people on stage and let them stand. But yeah, there was a lot of resistance to that. That's not how you do it. And this institutional aspect of recognizing all the stakeholders, there's plenty of other opportunities for that, but shouldn't be on your main feed going out to the world, right?
And pick the kids. They're so clever. They are so clever. They really, really are. Go and pick the kids because they tell it so well. They have the skills too to convey the message, the right message, in a way that people will understand it. It baffles me sometimes. It really does.
We're a big bureaucracy like the BBC. So let's talk about how things work there. Anyway, Alex.
But I guess fundamentally what we're talking about is relatability. Not people with the biggest job titles necessarily, but people who you see and you care about what they're saying because you see someone who looks like you or sounds like you or might just be engaging in that really special way. So I mean, to kind of throw it a different perspective. It seems that we're kind of, comparing and contrasting agencies' attitudes. And Becky, I was actually at the New Horizons arrival in JPL, and I saw the flag waving, and it was kind of startling, having sat around in Darmstadt once or twice, and seeing the differences and so on. But of course, there are other kinds of self-reporting space organizations out there, for instance, that are probably on the scale, to my mind, a little closer to wrestling or whatever else. I mean, ESPN Sports, just the kind of the SpaceX's kind of like ultra marketing mechanisms, of course, because they're not selling like an idea of space exploration to the public who fund them. They are selling the concept of, market share, to investors, and so it's almost like a completely different kind of narrative. I mean, I wonder what you kind of think about this feeling that we're in a really interesting time, aren't we? Where, space exploration and what's happening in the news is not solely down to what space agencies are doing. I mean, the private space sector seems to be off the scale, or maybe I'm paying too much attention to it, but it does feel like it's changed the fundamental chemistry of what people are talking about. I mean, am I wrong for suggesting such a thing, do you think?
No, I don't think so. Becky, what do you think?
No, I don't. I mean, we the sort of SpaceX first kind of astronaut flight, was it last summer? Sort of losing track of time. I mean, that garnered a sort of huge amount of interest and allowed us to look a bit more in depth at kind of, the impact of the sort of commercial sector on space. I think for, maybe for people who haven't been sort of following it kind of blow by blow, that was the kind of, oh, wow, actually, this is kind of happening. They're doing something kind of quite big now. So, I mean, that is kind of, it is changing. I suppose, a few years ago, we'd just be sort of looking at what was coming out of the European Space Agency or just NASA. Now there are all these other streams too. I mean, other countries too. I mean, the HOPE mission, which I loved reporting on this year. I was allowed time off COVID to sort of cover the Mars stuff. That was my time off for good behaviour. But it was really interesting to sort of deal with this sort of new, really kind of young sort of space industry in the United Arab Emirates, and it was really sort of pleasurable kind of meeting. I mean, online, of course, we were going to go out and do it, but COVID scuppered that. Meeting the people involved, the Israel Israel's attempt to land on the moon, which was that last year,
that
or year before?
Yeah, Bereshit.
Yeah. That was, that it's just really, just things are changing a lot. It's kind of like the game's opening up quite a bit, and SpaceX are quite interesting because I obviously sort of, sorry, it's my cat's trying to get in the room. The access is a bit different. It's a bit of a different way of working for us. So, they tend to sort of deal with the business correspondents perhaps a bit more than the science correspondents sometimes. So it's been kind of interesting for us kind of trying to navigate that world. I mean, John, you do a bit more of it than me, I think.
Yeah, I do quite a lot of commercial space. I mean, we've seen this revolution in commercial off-the-shelf components now going into satellites that are very inexpensive compared to these glorious gold-plated machines that the big space agencies have built in the past or continue to. I mean, it's not an either or. It's just a different way of doing things. But yeah, when you get to meet them, these are people that have been energized by space, who say, well, how can I be involved? And they can actually start a company now and have a realistic possibility of being able to do something because the costs have come down so much. And they've got great ideas. Whereas in the past, you might be constrained by a national space budget and they could only do this. And in the case of the UK, we send all of our money to Paris, or virtually all of it, 75% of it. We don't have a national space budget as such in the United Kingdom. There's stuff out there that you can do now. The venture capitalists are interesting. They want to get involved. A lot of this stuff will crash and burn for sure, but it's exciting. It is a new era, and it's going to be very interesting to see the stuff that comes out. I've been following very closely the radar satellites that commercial companies are producing now to image the surface of the Earth day or night, whatever the weather. Now, I mean, 10 years ago, these were huge, expensive beasts. They really were. I mean, they would cost hundreds of millions of euros, tons to put in orbit. Nobody but the military or the big space agencies could do radar satellites. Now they're the size of a suitcase. You can build them for under 2 million, But that changes the game completely.
Yeah. But let me pick up on that because, sometimes it's presented as a dichotomy. You said it's not an either or thing. I mean, you don't build a mission to Mercury. You don't build 10 of them. You don't build 100 of them and send them on their way and hope one gets there, right? So there's a reason that they're built the way they're built. Low Earth orbit is a different environment. We've learned an awful lot about how to do things in LEO. We need to fold that into what we do in the space agencies as well. But one of the dangers I see a little bit is that it's often presented that they're doing it better. And what you are doing is wrong and defunct. And of course, the problem with that is that, well, A, it's not true. We're doing something different. In the science area, at least, we're doing something different. But I've experienced this with the general public turning around and saying, why should we pay you any money anymore? Why should we do what you're doing? It's like, well, you won't get pictures of Pluto. You won't get observatories like JWST if you don't fund. So I wonder how we can make a balance, or not a compromise, but how can we find that they actually work together? And Commercial Crew is one way of that, right? Now you've put it, in the domain where you say, well, the low Earth orbit stuff you do commercially, but the exploration stuff we do ourselves because it's different. Do you see that in the same way as I do? Or am I just being deluding myself?
Even in low Earth orbit, it's teamwork, isn't it? I mean, a guy I know quite well is Will Marshall, who's the head of the Planet Earth Observation Company. Next to Elon Musk and Starlink, he has the biggest constellation of satellites up there with his images of the Earth, taking a picture of planet Earth every single day. I don't know how many he's got up there now, but it's about over 300 satellites. Will is he did his science at University of Leicester, and then he went off to America to do it all with NASA, and now on his own. And I said to him about his images. So on the one hand, here you are taking a picture of planet Earth every single day, okay, at 4-meter resolution. So you see everything, above 4 meters wide. And yet the American Space Agency with the US Geological Survey launches one Landsat mission costs $1 billion, and has a resolution, I forget what it is now, but it's about 10 meters. And it doesn't come back over the same part of the Earth for however many days. And I said, how long before Congress turns around and says, actually, we don't need to launch Landsat missions anymore, because that chap, that British guy in Silicon Valley, Will Marshall, he's doing it. And Will goes, well, hang on a second, I calibrate all of my images against Landsat and Sentinel-2. So please don't stop flying them, because my instruments are as good as they are, because the space agencies are still launching those wonderful state-of-the-art images that they put on those big missions. And I get a lot of that from these new space companies. You know, I say to them, well, you know, we don't need the big European Meteosat, you know, whatever it is, METOP weather satellite that costs X billion euros, is the size of a school bus, because you can measure humidity and temperature in a box this big. And they say, no. We need them because we do the calibration, because they are so high fidelity. So it's kind of a mix going forward, and it's kind of trying to explain that to people, that it's not either or, it's more. It's more. That's what it is, you know?
But there is one area where, of course, we all have to operate in the same domain. We all, I mean, particularly now at low Earth orbit, becoming increasingly crowded. The number of near collisions that take place every day, they're just rising rapidly. How do we do this in a way that's sustainable as well? I know I'm not saying that because it's kind of a green thing to say, but this is a somewhat limited resource, low Earth orbit. And we've seen it with Starlink, for example, now that, you know, there's been lots of discussions with astronomers about what they may do to astronomy in space or on the ground. How do we reach, and it's often, you know, you saw that yourself, right? It's like, oh, well, we'll go and build your telescopes on the moon then. It's like, you clearly have no idea what we actually do and why we do what we do. But there's this sort of fanboy group, let's call them, who are pretty aggressive when it comes to anybody that goes against commercial space. So I think, you know, we're not there yet in terms of finding that balance. And, you know, journalism is one way, I hope. I mean, because nobody trusts me. I speak for a government space agency. I'm obviously untrustworthy.
Well, we're untrustworthy too, aren't we?
Well, maybe.
Untrustworthy. But I think you can have slightly complex messages, though. You know, not everything. I think sort of, if you explain things in an okay way, people sort of understand not everything has to be sort of totally black and white, that there's grey in between. And
no, you're right, but you know the vociferous crew, right? I mean, they're pretty ugly when they get going, right? But
yeah, but you also have to, it's the thing I said before, you kind of have to remember it's sort of one group of people. You have to, I think you always have to think about the wider audience out there. You can't get too hung up by sort of, you know, a small group of people on Twitter. You have to think more broadly than that. You know, like my mum's she doesn't know what a Twitter is, but she, you know, she's not on it, and she's a smart woman. You know, there's like lots of, you know, you've got to go a bit beyond, I think.
Yeah.
And it's in the example that you cite, I'm afraid to say it's regulation, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, we have guidelines on space debris, guidelines, you know. I was reading a report that came out in January from the Office of Inspector General or something that the US has, looking at NASA's approach to space debris down the years. And there is this, as you probably know, this 25-year rule in low Earth orbit, which means that, you know, the end of your mission, you're supposed to bring whatever it is that you've put up there out of the sky within 25 years. NASA does a pretty good job with its low Earth orbiting. I think the number was 96% compliance. In the industry wide, it's woeful. It's down there 20, 30% or something, you know? And why is that? It's because there's no comeback currently. You know, and, you know, we have a legacy of people just littering the planet. I mean, the classic one that, you know, the people in the room behind you don't like hearing about is ENVISAT, European Space Agency's Goliath of a Earth observation satellite that was launched in 2003, I think it was.
Yeah, roughly.
You know, had it launched with sufficient fuel to bring it out of orbit, they would have had to start bringing it out of orbit 4 months after they'd launched it. That's how little fuel it went into orbit with. And of course, after 10 years, it died one morning. And it's up there, however many tons, just circling the Earth, waiting to bash into something, and won't come down for, well, over 100 years on its own. So this is a responsibility that everybody's got to get to grips with, including those new players, those commercial companies, because, their business could be wiped out one Friday morning.
Yeah, well, I think that's interesting. There was a statistic today showing the number of what we call conjunctions between satellites, and how that's now 50% of them are Starlink against everybody else, but not included in that diagram was Starlink on Starlink. And so there's come a point where they actually just kill themselves, right? So it is obviously incumbent on their business model. But the rest of us in the meantime are moving our satellites around. You remember the Aeolus story where in fact nobody even spotted it, right? And it was hello, can you move your satellite? No reply. Oh, well, we'd better move ours.
We'll send you an email. Send you an email, and it was in somebody's inbox, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but that's fascinating as well, because there's so much stuff up there now. How do you manage it? How do you do traffic management? And of course, it's beyond the human individual now, or even a team of people sitting in a room. Like, it's got to be done by computers now. The computers will, this is the whole machine learning, artificial intelligence. First of all, you've got to identify what it is, then work out its orbit, then work out the conjunction, and then take action. And that's beyond, was fast approaching beyond human capability. That has to be automated in some way. And unless we get on top of it, we're going to find ourselves in trouble very, very soon.
Yeah.
Well, see, this is really interesting because it segues, because of course we have people watching tonight from all over the world, and we welcome them in these episodes. Caroline Garrity asks a question about whether it drives you bonkers to see incorrect or I guess you could say fact-free reporting out there. Because of course right now we're talking about really interesting stuff, because I wanted to ask you guys about what you think the biggest stories are now, which are the biggest ones upcoming. We talked about JWST before, because I guarantee that no matter how accurate or brilliant the reporting will be, it will compete with stories like, let's just say, just throwing it out there, the odd story about an asteroid. That's not going to come anywhere near us, of course, but there will be that panicked and terrifying headline about the near miss and this and that. And so, does that frustrate you? I'm not putting words into Caroline's mouth there, but she asks, I think, a very valid question. Does it frustrate you that reporting about the real stories competes with, I guess you could say, the not so substantial ones, the not justified ones, and let's just say it now, things that are highly irresponsible?
It is frustrating, but I think maybe there's not as much of the bad stuff as people think. It just stands out a bit more, so it kind of seems to magnify it. Because on the whole, like when I suppose I'm talking about the sort of UK press coverage. I think there's some really good science correspondents here, and they write really, really good stuff, from sort of the tabloids through to the broadsheets through to TV reporting. These people, who sort of I've known for quite a few years, and they really care about it, and they really care about getting things right as well. I think sometimes there's a frustration in newspapers, particularly. There might be a really decent story in there, but it has an absolutely horrific headline put on it. But I feel like, I suppose in the sort of mainstream media, I feel like I'm not seeing loads of stuff that's tearing my hair out. I think one of the things about the COVID this year, it sort of elevated sort of science and health reporters a little bit, because their newsrooms are suddenly, you're having to deal with a really complex story about the immune system and reinfection, and you've got kind of this nerdy bunch who've been sitting in the newsroom for years, and they know this stuff, and suddenly they're quite important people. They're not just sort of doing the and finally item on the news, they're doing the lead story day in, day out. So I think there's a real sort of value in having having specialist, I would say this because I'm a specialist correspondent, specialist reporter, but having specialist reporters on outlets. I don't know, what do you think? Do you think I'm sort of looking at this through misty eyes, John? Do you think there's loads of crap out there, and I'm just sort of finding the good stuff? Or
of course there's rubbish out there, but like you say, there's some superb stuff out there as well. And I guess the difficulty for the lay audience is being able to judge when they've got a pile of poop or something that is a pile of gold as well. And it's probably easier for us to judge that than it is for them. I mean, on that topic, Alex, that you mentioned, a lot of it comes down to your editors, because they'll ask that question of you. They'll pick up a newspaper and they'll say, this asteroid. And we have a bit of a rule, which is that we're not interested unless it comes within the orbit of the moon. And even then, it's got to be big. And if it's not particularly big, it's got to come within the orbit of geostationary satellites. And then we might be interested, because then we might actually be able to take some interesting imagery of it. But
you're right, actually, John. That is our role, to play things down as well.
Yeah, we say no a lot. You say no.
Yeah.
No. We're very good at saying no.
But is there a frustration? I mean, I've worked with some editors who've come to ask me, will you come on TV program news and this is the angle we want to take? And I'm like, no, not really, not that angle. And what's interesting is the editors, maybe the person that's talking to me, there's an instruction line, and I say, well, this is a much more interesting story. What about you go back with that? And very often it's like, oh, well, thanks for actually giving us a bit more than just that one bullet, which was asteroid coming to Earth, because then they will engage with that. So I think it's knowing who to call to kind of get a bit of feedback and say, is that good or not? And I know that you guys are very good at that, and many of the big media outlets and some of the papers are very good at that. But if there's no moderator there, then it's the editor who just sort of says, do it, right? And it's like, what then?
And be clear, I mean, there's contested science out there as well.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, just because you've got professor in front of you doesn't mean that actually you've got wisdom.
Well, I think this is an important point, right? This is the thing I think we all struggle with in science, is that, and you know this, but some media don't. It's like, tell me the answer, right? What's the answer? Smart person, title. Yeah. What is the answer? It's like, I don't know, actually. That's where we're going. Or, in fact, there's two things, and we're trying to test between them. And that's not an easy sell in a world where people want simple answers. They want a package. Does it fit my worldview? Yeah. Is this the answer I want? It's like, I don't even know, frankly.
Don't you think, Mark, over the last year, people have kind of got quite used to the I don't know? I feel like I've done a year of I don't know pieces. We've done sort of on COVID, what do we know? Can I get COVID twice? Like, but earlier on, I don't know. But here's kind of what we do know about the cold viruses and other. There's I feel like people might desire yes and no answers, but I think they're okay to cope with a bit of nuance.
Yeah,
too, as long as you can explain why. And I think what you said. I think sometimes as well. I think one of the reasons you're good at what you do is because you engage with people. So if someone phones you up and says, will you come and talk about this crazy story, you won't just put the phone down. You'll sort of explain why it is maybe a crazy story and why this is. I think that's it's a two-way process, because you have to forget some of the producers working on a program, they'll be dealing with Scottish politics, a bit of Brexit, a business story, and this sort of space story that sort of landed on their desk as well. So I think that it's I think it's okay to have conversations with people. It's and it kind of helps everyone, really.
Yeah, some of you are so good that I've been I've done a briefing with the producer or somebody else, and then you realise the journalist comes on and they know the entire story, and then you've got nothing left to say because they've been so well briefed. What the hell?
The space station's a good example of that, and the science on the space station. People sort of say to me, well, what do they do up there, and what have they discovered? And as if they are supposed to have discovered cancer, the cure for cancer, whatever it is. And the type of research that they do up there is about systems and processes. It's about understanding in those very special conditions that they have, one aspect of how a cell functions. One aspect of how in an alloy, a metal alloy, the atoms come together and crystallize. And that doesn't mean that you all of a sudden you have unobtainium that you can then build cars that only weigh 10 grams. It feeds into all of those developments that make our lives better, back here on Earth, and that's quite a hard sell to explain that to people, you know.
Well, this is interesting. If I could just slip just one final question from the audience, and Chris Lee, has joined us.
Chris Lee, never heard of him.
And he says, obviously, we're in a very, interesting and information saturated time, it seems. Do scientists have to work harder these days than ever to engage with the public, and are they getting better at it?
Well, I think they're definitely getting better at it. Like 100% getting better at it. I mean, I just feel like now it's kind of, I suppose when I started, how long have I been in the BBC, John? 15 years.
Don't say.
Well, less than him.
Less than John. Quite a long time now. But when I started, there was like when you spoke to scientists, they'd be quite sort of worried. They wouldn't be thinking about what they wanted to say to sort of the general population out there. They'd be more worried about saying something that their peers would, Professor such and such would sort of sit up and think, well, that was terribly clever, or I best not say this because this will annoy Professor such and such over here. And I think that's going. And I feel like sort of science communication and talking to the media, or just direct communication through social media with scientists, is just becoming part of the job. And if you're funded by public, the public purse, you should be sort of, you shouldn't be sniffy about kind of, being able to explain what you're doing and why it's exciting. I'm not saying like everyone's good at it either. Like, some people are natural communicators and they thrive, like shove a TV camera in front of them and it's like, they're unbelievable. And some people are really nervous and they really hate it, and you kind of think, well, okay, maybe give it a try a few more times, but if don't torture yourself, don't sort, if this isn't for you, you don't have to kind of do this. Maybe find another way of communicating if that's what you want to do. But they're definitely getting better, and I think it's definitely being seen as sort of more important. I mean, that's a good thing about social media. It's kind of opened that up massively as well, that sort of direct interaction. I mean, as journalists too, kind of having that direct interaction with the audience too has been really interesting, I think.
And you've got a whole generation coming through now who are very, very good at it. Because that's all they've known. That's it's my daughter, probably the same with you, Mark, your kids. It's almost as if they're born understanding how to operate phones and stuff like that, cameras. I mean, this kit comes now with no instruction manuals at all, because somehow innately when you're born now, how to operate this stuff. And a lot of these techniques, where people used to do media training so that they could talk in sentences that people would understand out there, and you have to have 3 ideas and stick to those 3 ideas, all of that kind of stuff that they used to to tell the people when they did their media training. You don't need to tell the kids this stuff. They just kind of know it, and that's what I going back to that bit about the lineup of the suits that so often we see at the European Space Agency still. You just get away from it, have the confidence in the generation coming through, because they really will do you proud. I interact with them, we see them, and you just sort of think, wow, they are amazing.
Yeah. You're talking to the wrong guy. You know the phone number of the person you have to talk to. Get on the phone. I wanted to I go to a kind of a final question for myself in a moment, but I wanted to pick up on that a little bit, because what you said, Becky, is very interesting to me. I think, social media has opened up another channel, talking to somebody who writes stories but doesn't necessarily do the TV part. I mean, TV is weird, right? But because I've often said that anybody that can do TV is slightly a genetic freak, because anybody who can read the 10 o'clock news, well, I mean, it is odd, right? Because you have to kind of be preternaturally calm and not think about what's down the line. I remember the first time I did live TV, at some point halfway through, I suddenly thought about the million people on the other end, and my legs started shaking. It was a completely unconscious reaction, and I was aware it couldn't be seen on screen, but I had to move to stop it jiggling. Anybody who reads the 10 o'clock news is a freak. I'm sorry, I mean, they're lovely people, but to be able to sit there and just do that job and look nice and look relatable and look calm instead of actually running for the hills. So I think it's a very important point that TV is one thing, but there's many other vectors for getting those messages out, which may not need that one gene which says one sentence, you're done, move on. Remember, your colleague David Schuckman, working with him for something, and he said, right, well, talk about this. Very good. Now make it half the length. No, half the length still. And after about the fifth one, I thought, I don't know what I'm doing here anymore.
It's really hard. But it's not. But it's kind of not hard as well, because sometimes I think like half of the trick of doing it is to, when you're interviewing someone, particularly for TV, is to try and get them to forget the massive like camera kit and lighting and producer and cameraman and everything sort of as you're doing it. But that's half the trick to sort. And actually, of all the scientists I've interviewed, there's only probably been a couple who like really went to pieces. Most of them were really, really, really brilliant. Honestly, I think people are sort of, it's not as hard as you think. Like live TV is a bit different. It's okay too. Well,
Becky does a lot of that, live spot stuff where you stand there in front of a camera all day long, and you have people brought to you, and you've got about 30 seconds to say hello, what's your name, all the rest of it, and then you sort of start interviewing them like you've known them all your life, and then after 2 minutes it's bye, out the way, get off, take the microphone off.
It's a weird job. It's a weird job. It's kind of fun though. It's sort of so much can go wrong. I mean, like loads can go wrong. I forgot someone's name once halfway through. I can't remember what his name was. It was something like sort of duck or something, and I sort of went through all the birds, like Professor Pigeon, Professor Seagull, something. It was awful, and I kept on going with it as well. I've had like the microphone fall off of someone, all of these terrible things can happen, but it does make it exciting. I mean, but the thing is, like, I'll do the TV stuff, but I hate doing public speaking. I won't do a talk in a room with lots of people. It's a nightmare. So horses and courses, isn't it?
Mark torments me with this picture which was taken, it was the day that Rosetta woke up, wasn't it? I think it was, and I don't know where Becky was, but she clearly wasn't available that day, so I was the mug that had to stand there in front of the TV camera all day long, and I did 23 live inserts, and the last one was coming up, which was early evening back in the UK. And by then the cake had come out in the control room there behind you, and the champagne was out. And it was Andrea Camacho, the flight director for Rosetta. Yeah. He was required for something, and I was just about to go live. And he walked past me, and he needed to get rid of his glass of champagne because he was requested. So he just gave it to me. So I'm standing here on air with a glass of champagne thinking, I'm on live television and I've got a glass of champagne in my hands. And of course, because I was so tired at the end of the day, I stopped calling it the Rosetta spacecraft, and I started calling it the Risotto spacecraft.
I hope you did that with the glass of champagne.
Yeah, that's the problem. They must have thought I was well gone,
So, all right, my last question for because we're running long, but I mean, I'm thoroughly enjoying it as well. Highlights, pick one thing which in your long careers of science reporting. I mean, I'm looking. You talked about rocks flying around, Becky, at some point, and you know what story I'm talking about. But I don't know if you consider that a highlight. Maybe not.
I've had bonkers. I've had bonkers. I went to report on. Actually, it was a space story. It was sort of using satellites, Earth observation to predict when volcanoes were going to go off. And of course, I was caught up in an eruption, not sort of, from the top, but it was sort of the lava exploded. And me and my crew, really, really nearly.
This is Mount Etna. This is Etna, wasn't it?
It was Etna. It was on Mount Etna. So it's sort of, I made the news. I was a little news story for a day. BBC reporter reporting on volcanoes, almost killed by volcano. But that was, it was awful because obviously I'm a science reporter, so I didn't really expect to I didn't really sign up for sort of war zones, and I did a public disorder course a few years ago, like where they throw bottle, just to get you used to sort of, and I hated it. I don't really like I don't like danger. I like kind of nice, sort of safe environments. So yeah, I'm not sure I'm not sure that was a highlight, but it was quite exciting. But I suppose my favourite space missions have been, you know, New Horizons and Rosetta. Just been like, you know, it feels like you are witnessing like a little bit of history. You know, it feels like you were sort of, it's in that kind of real discovery happening before your eyes was kind of amazing. But I've done all sorts. I've been off in the jungle looking for selenodons, down in submarines. I mean, it's a really cool job. It's really, you know, we're really, I feel I'm really lucky. I love it. And I think I think what John said as well, that wow factor, you know, the minute I do a story and there's not like that wow factor, or, you know, you don't feel it when you wake up. It's sort of, you know, it's done. It's sort of time to do something else. But it's genuinely, you know, I love learning stuff. You know, I forget it all because that's the only way you can do it, because you're constantly having, you know, you're sort of diving around. So my memory's awful now. I pub quizzes, I am the worst at. Everyone thinks I'm going to be really good because I've sort of done loads of different stories, but I'm terrible at that. But yeah, too many things to mention. But space, it was, you know, New Horizons and Rosetta were just really magical. I think they're amazing.
So John, it's got to be iceberg of the week. No, go on.
I am the BBC's official iceberg correspondent. This is true. I'm fascinated by I'm fascinated by planet Earth. Let's be clear. It is the most beautiful jewel in the cosmos. It is just fantastic. And to look down at it from orbit is extraordinary with the tools that we have. I mean, we really have democratized science in that respect, is that anybody now can go to the Sentinels that Europe's extraordinary project that Europe has put up there and look at the data yourself, which I do on a daily basis. My kind of stories, though, I think the maddest story I think I ever did was when Inmarsat, the big telecommunications company, rang me up and said, we know that the missing Malaysian jet MH370 was still flying five hours after it went missing. And I went, what? They said, yeah, this is going to come out very soon because we've had to tell the American government, but it was still communicating with our satellites after 5 hours. And I thought, okay. And I went on BBC TV with this story, and the presenters looked at me thinking, this guy's talking absolute nuts stuff. So that was kind of an extraordinary space story. Absolutely. And then I think probably my highlight is got to be the landing of Curiosity, simply because the landing system was untried. There was still that jeopardy in a way that there isn't now. You know, the Americans have landed on Mars quite a lot. They've only had one failure, and you could see that. I've sensed it the last two landings. For Perseverance and for Insight, you know, when I've been there in JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, there wasn't the same jeopardy. There's more confidence now that they can do that, but there wasn't a Curiosity. I mean, everybody said that landing system, Skycraft, is crazy. It really is crazy. You're never gonna put it down. And so to see the joy of the people there turn around to the world and say, you said we couldn't do it, we did it. And not only that, we absolutely nailed it. That was fabulous. That really was fabulous.
So you'll get to come and relive that with ExoMars, right?
Yeah. Oh God. Honestly, you know, don't go there. Really
we have got to go there, right? Not now, but we have got to go there, and we will. Yeah, I mean, it's a story, and I think you know, if that works and we pull that off, it will be astonishing.
And the jeopardy very definitely will be there for that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very definitely.
I mean, the Russians have landed once on the surface with Mars 3, briefly, and Europe has never successfully landed and then transmitted. We know what happened to Beagle 2, but yeah, I mean, the sense of tension with ExoMars is enormous. It's going to be
exciting. It's going to be exciting. But hopefully we'll be able to come in person to actually, not to Mars.
Well, you know, we are thinking about an innovative communications campaign, you know, first journalist to Mars with one of those big rockets that the guy keeps blowing up. But yeah, anyway.
But we'll have to do an Uplink live on location for when that happens. You know, and the story continues. Becky and Jonathan, what an absolute pleasure it is to meet you. Followed you on Twitter for a long time, and On behalf of everyone at Space Rocks, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you aboard. Now, I'm not sure if it's within the BBC brand guidelines to do what we're about to do, Mark. I'm not sure if you pre-warned them, but
I never warn anybody, although if anybody's watched anything. So yeah, no, this is the karaoke. No, it's not. So where Jonathan shows
my line's about to clap.
So where John shows that he isn't wearing pajamas.
Yeah.
No, it's just a hand signal. This.
Oh yes, yes.
The Vulcan salute, live long and prosper for space.
Okay,
so you can do that.
You need help first of all, though. Don't you?
Becky's first on, and then rocks, space rocks.
Have I done the right hand?
You have.
Have I done it the right hand?
Yeah.
It should be backward for you. Right hand for space, left hand for rocks.
Right hand. Yeah, that's it. I've got it, haven't I? Haven't I got it? I don't know.
I don't know what's happening on the other hand. That's just one finger, or is the other one zoned out in the Mars background? Where's the other one? Where's the other finger?
Oh, right, sorry, yeah. No, it's that. Sorry. Sorry.
Lord.
The tendons have gone in this. It's look. It doesn't.
Oh no, ugly.
Anymore,
Shall we talk about bikes? No, let's not. Let's talk about bike crashes. All right. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for coming on, and
thank you very much for having us. It's been really.
I haven't seen Becky for several months, so it's been.
Oh, I know,
nice.
John, hello, my colleague.
Absolutely, and and as you know, when we do get back to normal, so fix that coronavirus thing, please, Becky.
No problem. I'm on it. I'm on it.
Exactly.
People.
Get some science.
Yeah.
When we come back and we do some live events. Well, I've asked you before, but you're more than welcome, and we'd love to have you there. And there are other things as well, but we will talk offline. Thank you very much for coming on.
Be well. Thanks so much for your time.
Bye.
Bye. Very good, Mark. Well, I mean, gosh, what a reminder of just, some fantastic people in and around what we do. And I think, truly inspirational careers, and just great storytellers as well. I suppose we never want to forget that there's a huge human element to science reporting, and I think that they just kind of confirm that behind science reporting as well are people who really care about what they're doing. I mean, people hugely passionate about science and indeed space, which we were on tonight.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? We didn't even quite get there. Becky and John both said, make the scientist part of the story. It's about the human aspect as well. I would aver that it's also about the journalist and what they are as humans. Sometimes, Hunter S. Thompson comes to mind. Maybe the journalist gets bigger than the story. But social media has allowed the journalists to become known and to interact and engage, perhaps in a way that hasn't been so much possible in the past. And personally, for me personally, they're both great friends, and they have done brilliant work in bringing what are indeed complex stories and getting people like me and many of my colleagues to sort of focus. What are you really trying to tell us here? And I've learned an enormous amount from both of them. Absolutely.
Indeed. Well, I mean, just vital messengers. When it comes to just what's happening in this fascinating time that we live in. For better or worse, there's an absolute need for people to pair through it all. And two fantastic guests. Mark, as ever, a pleasure to join you. And I suppose we can't quite suggest what's happening next week because it's still information, but it's looking pretty cool. And we'll be back at the same time on Thursday, it's looking like. So fingers crossed.
Absolutely. We seem to have some very interesting guests in the next weeks and months lined up, and really excited to bring that to everybody as soon as we just got the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And that doesn't tell you what their names are. I that just made that up. But.
All right. We'll see you soon, Mark.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.